Hi, welcome to Snails and Fairy Dust. Today I want to show you how to make these retro butterfly motif earrings. I call the pattern butterfly plates because they remind me of these plates my grandmother had when I was a kid from Corning. They had like butterflies and flowers on them, so it's sort of inspired by those plates. I do have a pattern you can find on my Etsy shop or on my Shopify store, which you can find the links below. But if you're a new beader and you don't want to follow along with the pattern, there's still so much you could learn here, a lot of beading technique. So let's get started. Okay, so for our supplies today, I am using size 11 Miyuki Delica beads. I have a size 12 beading needle. I have these leverback ear wires, and I have wire guards, which are called wire guards or thread guards, depending on where you're buying them from. I am also using a nylon beading thread for the fringe, and then for the main part of the earring, I am using Fireline and a 6-pound weight. I have clippers, pliers, and I have my pattern, and I am ready to go. So to get started, I'm going to cut 4 to 5 feet of my Fireline beading thread, thread my needle, and then I'm going to pick up the first 4 beads in my beading pattern. So in this case, it is 4 of these white beads, creamy white beads. And then I'm going to pull them down towards the end of my thread, leaving about a 4-inch tail. And then I bring my needle around and come back through the first 2 beads. And when I pull my thread through, I am going to end up with the 2 sets of 2 beads side by side like this. And then I bring my needle back down through the second beads, pull that tight, and then I'm going to come up, back up through the first 2 beads, and then I will come down through the second 2 beads again. Now this is only for the first 2 beads. We loop around them twice to make sure our first section is extra strong. And then from here on out, we're just adding 2 beads at a time. So my next 2 are this yellowy color. So, and then I bring my needle down through the last 2 beads I added. Pull that tight. And then I'm going to come up through these 2 new beads. Then I pick up my next 2 beads. And I'm going to come up through those last beads I just added. And I pull that tight. And then I come down through the new beads, the newest beads, like so. And then I pick up my next 2 beads. In this case, it's 1 white and 1 yellowy orange one. And then I come down through the last beads I added. And now I'm going to go ahead and come up through the newest beads. And you're going to continue on like this, building a sort of ladder across. This first row has 17 groups of 2 beads. So when you get to the end of those 17 beads, meet me back here and we'll start the next section. Okay, so I hope you have finished your 17 groups of 2 beads, and it should look something like this. And if you take a look at the top of your beads, you'll see there are little thread bridges connecting each 2 beads. We're going to build on those. So I pick up my first 4 beads in the next row, and then I slide my needle under the second thread bridge, like so. I have this little loop, but they're not sitting properly. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back up through the second 2 beads. And now we bring our needle down through the outside beads. And then we're going to come back up through the second 2 beads one more time. And when we do this pull, They should be sitting properly like little bricks on top of the row before them. Sometimes you have to just nudge them into position, and then just like that. And for the rest of this row, we're just adding 2 beads at a time. It's only for starting the row that we have 4 beads. So I pick up my next 2 beads, I slide under the next thread bridge, try not to get tangled up there, and then I come back up through those 2 beads. There we go. And then I add my next 2 beads in the pattern and slide underneath the next thread bridge. Pull my needle through and come back up through those beads like so. Get there, we'll get there, there we are. So, and then bring my needle up through there. And we continue to add 2 beads at a time going across this row. And then when you get to the end of the row, you work back in the other direction and you just keep going back and forth until you get to the top of your pattern. So here we are. I'm coming underneath there. Try not to get tangled up. It's important to always move slowly so you don't end up with knots, because that's the worst. So just take your time. Coming back up through these beads, if I could keep my needle in my hand. Back up through these and continue on like that for the rest of your row. And then meet me back here when you finish that row, and I'm going to show you how to start a row of brick stitch again. Okay, so here we are having finished our first row of brick stitch, and I just want to go over starting a row of brick stitch for you again, because I feel like that could be the trickiest part with brick stitch. So let's pick up our first 4 beads in our next brick stitch row. And we're going to take our needle and slide it underneath the second thread bridge. Pull that through, and then we bring our needle back up through the second 2 beads. And then we're going to go down through the first 2 beads. And now we come back up through the second 2 beads again. And they are sitting where they should. Lovely. And then from here on out, we continue to build that row 2 beads at a time, just as we did the last one. You should be a pro at this by now. And you're going to continue to build it up the pattern. It'll be decreasing like a pyramid. And when you get to the part of the pattern where it says single brick stitch, meet me back here and we'll just go over that quickly, so in case you have any confusion about that. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, so this pattern calls for single brick stitch after you've done 5 rows of double brick stitch. And single brick stitch is really simple. It's just we're going to add 2 beads when we're starting a row rather than 4. So we add our 2 beads, we come back up through the second bead, and then we go down through the first bead, back up through the second bead, and then we just simply continue the row, adding 1 bead at a time. There are 2 rows of single brick stitch on this side of the pattern, and then when you start at the bottom, you'll see at the very end there are another 2 rows of single brick stitch. So keep weaving and meet me back here to add a wire guard. Okay, so now we've reached the top of our pyramid at this side of the earring, and it's time to add our wire guard. So the first thing we need to do is find a way to get to the top 2 center beads of our pattern. So to do that, we're going to weave back down into our beadwork, like so, moving 1 bead at a time or 2 beads at a time if we're in the row of double brick stitch. So we move down and always moving one, one section at a time. You don't want to try to put your needle through too many beads at a time because it's very easy to break them if you sort of force your way through. So I've gone down a couple of rows and now I'm coming back up so I can get my needle to exit one of those 2 center beads. So in one more bead I will be there. And here now I've exited those 2 center beads on one side and I'm ready to add my wire guard. So I pick it up and you see on the side there's a little hole there. So take my nail through that, pull it down towards the beadwork, and then I will take my needle and come down through the hole on the other side of the wire guard and into the second bead in the second center bead, like so. And I want to make sure that thread stays in that little channel on the wire guard. And then I want to loop around this again, so I'm going to go down 1 row and then come back up and go back through that hole on the wire guard. Pull it tight, and then down through the hole on the other side of the wire guard. Like so. And after that, I want to weave my needle down a few rows into my work until I find 2 groups of 2 beads next door to each other. And then I'm going to sort of wrap around those 2. Here we go, we have these 2. So I'm just going to go down one side, up the other side, down one side, up the other side, sort of looping around these 2 neighboring sets of 2 beads. And this creates tension, which will keep my thread from coming undone. So I like to go around 2 times. This is my second time around now. Let me go down. And then after that, I just sort of run down another few beads just to make sure my string is extra secure. And then I will clip it. So when you're done with that, meet me back here, and then we'll add a new thread so we can start the other side of our beadwork. Okay, so I am ready to start a new thread. I have cut another 4 feet of fire line, threaded my needle, and I'm going to anchor that thread into my beadwork using the same method we used to end the other beadwork. So I'm going to find 2 sets of 2 beads next door to each other and loop around those 2 sets of beads until I've created enough tension that my thread isn't going anywhere. And for me, that's always usually two times around. So here we are. I've gone through once. Now I'm going through a second time. And then I am going to work my needle down the outside edge of my work so that my needle ends up exiting the outside edge of that first row of ladder stitch. And once we are there, we then start to just build our brick stitch again, just as we were doing before. So I pick up 4 beads, bring my needle underneath the second thread bridge, and then I come back up through the second 2 beads, and then down through the first 2 beads, and then up through the second 2 beads again, and I am ready to just build that row 2 at a time, just as I've done before. Okay, so hopefully you have finished your second set of brick stitch and you have a beautiful looking butterfly like this. Now we're going to cut our thread for the fringe, which is the nylon beading thread. We're going to cut 4 to 5 feet of it, and we are going to stretch it out to get all of the kinks out of the thread. And then you thread your needle. Again, we are going to anchor it just as we did last time. And we do that by looping around 2 sets of 2 beads, and we're going to get that thread nice and secure in there. It's very important though, before you do this, that you stretch out your nylon thread, because it's a bit, you'll feel it's a bit stretchy, and you don't want that stretch to come later. When your fringe is hanging over time, it would stretch out and then you would end up with gaps in your beadwork. So you want to make sure you stretch that ahead of time. So I did that, and now I'm anchoring this thread, which we should be really good at by now because you've done it a couple of times, and I'm sure you're a pro by now. And then we'll be ready to start our fringe. Okay, so now my thread is exiting the outside bead in my bottom row of single brick stitch, and I'm ready to add my fringe. So I pick up the beads in the pattern for my fringe, and that's boring to watch, so I've sped that up for you. And once they're there, I pick up an end bead. And then I take my needle back through the fringe beads, and I take it all the way up to the main part of the beadwork, like so. Here I've got about half of them, and then I'm going to take my needle back through all of those beads. Sometimes it goes smoothly where you get all the beads with one needle, and then sometimes it just doesn't. In this case it didn't. So I am gonna just make sure I don't miss any beads. That's really important. Don't skip any beads, because then you have exposed thread. And when I get to the top, I bring my needle through that row, that bottom row of brick stitch, through that single brick stitch. So just through the first row and the first bead in the first row, and then I come down through the neighbor bead in that first row, like so. And then I add my next group of beads. Here we are. I've added those, and I do the same thing. I've added the beads, and then I pick up my end bead, bring my needle back through that row of fringe, make sure we don't miss any beads. So I have those, and then I'm gonna get these other ones that I missed. And come right back up through there. Oh, there's my cat walking through. That's nice of her. She's my assistant. And then I come down through the neighboring bead, and then I start my next row, and I continue like that until I have all of my fringe in place. And when you are done, here we are. Look what we did. We made these gorgeous earrings. I hope you're super proud of yourself. And if you stuck around this far, thank you, and I hope you'll join me again.